All right. Well, welcome everyone, and thank you for listening to our very first podcast. I'm Eric Ahn, your host, and I'm coming from Blue Moon Counseling, where I'm the Executive Director of Business Development. And I'm here today with Michelle Crastel. She is the licensed therapist for Blue Moon Counseling, and she is the founder and CEO. So welcome, Michelle.
Hi, Eric. Thanks for having me.
So we're here to talk about today about Blue Moon, what we do, what our company was about, and just trying to get it out there to the public. And we have a lot of things that we want to discuss. We have a lot of initiatives, a lot of campaign, a lot of efforts. But today we just kind of really want to focus about our message. Michelle is my wife of 13 years and 14 years. This year. And so we have quite a history and quite a story to tell. We are going to start on a topic that kind of, I think, every show we want to do kind of a topic to start with and see where the conversation goes and to kind of talk about where Blue Moon came from. My thought today was kind of bringing, I think it's somewhat of like our ground zero, and that's Columbine. Just recently, on the 19th, they re-aired Bowling for Columbine on MSNBC for the first time nationally televised. And so being about 20 years since 9/11, that would probably be the next big topic that we would probably talk about, but Columbine. But about 20 years later from Columbine, and I was a senior and you were a junior. Yep. We are both from Colorado, born and raised, transplanted when she was just 6 months old.
3 years old.
3 years old. So pretty much a native, especially in Colorado standards. Mm-hmm. So we want to just kind of talk today about, start off with Columbine and how that impacted, I think, where we are, where we've come to. But it was just one of those things that I think on a global scale, on a national scale, it was one of those first big scary things that hit home. It wasn't like a lot of other things you get scared on the news. I remember when I was young and watching Desert Storm, and when we first, invaded, and it was this big, military campaign. But I was a kid and I was watching on TV, and I didn't really quite understand it. It was still kind of like watching a movie, so it was kind of disconnecting. But then, fast forward and Columbine, literally, you lived right next door.
Yes, I did. I lived in Jefferson County. I grew up in Littleton with my family, and I went to Chatfield Senior High at the time. So Columbine was our neighboring rival school. Mm-hmm. And, a lot of my friends and peers went there, and I lost a friend, Cassie Bernal, there, who was part of my, at the time, West Bowles Community Church youth group, which was my social network, was my thing at the time. So because we were blended, Chatfield and Columbine, then I definitely felt that very close to home. And after Columbine happened, Chatfield Senior High opened up our doors to Columbine students.
That's right.
So it was right around prom time, I remember my junior year, and we opened the doors and the Columbine students would start to come to Chatfield, so we had split days. Mm-hmm. And so half of the day it was Columbine students, and then half of the day it was, the regular Chatfield students. So we had this kind of home of sharing our school, and I'll never forget just we had to put posters up our entryway of the school, because at Chatfield, when you walk in, all you see is the library below you.
Right.
And so a lot of the tragedies happen in the library. Okay. So we made welcoming, loving posters, and we blocked all of the visual entrance to the library to help make Columbine students feel welcome. And I remember wearing, blue and silver little ribbons to prom. And even at our prom at that time, we were at a table of 8, and some generous adults bought our entire meal because we were all wearing Columbine. And so it was definitely...
We were high schoolers.
Yeah, high schoolers at the time. It was devastating.
And so would you say that was kind of like your first like community shared trauma experience?
Yes.
I mean, there's a big difference, right? Like things that happen personally in our own families, but to kind of share a trauma experience with the community. That was the first time I felt a part of like a grieving process, or even being a part of like a quote unquote community that I wasn't even really part of. But what was like that sense of, you know, I think the scale of it, the grandeur of it, you know, the amount, you know, the devastation of it all, but critically at a time when you're in high school.
Mm-hmm.
So what's that, you know?
Yeah, it was huge. It was, you know, and here we are talking about mental illness, you know, and that's what Blue Moon Counseling is all about. That is what I've dedicated my career to, is treatment of mental illness in children and youth and adults, but mostly in children and youth, especially children who struggle with suicide, depression, anxiety, social bullying, you know, emotional pain that they're suffering through, whether it's a family situation or a school situation. And so I think that mental health really came to the forefront for me being really young, because I started struggling with the symptoms of trauma. Yeah. And so did all of us. We all went through our own grieving and our own trauma, depending on how close we were to the situation. But I think being peers and being in the same age group and being rivals and being, it was just so close to home that we really experienced the community violence act as a trauma, and a lot of people suffered. A lot of our generation suffered with, you know, the relash of that, and the depression, and then the anxiety. I can't even imagine what the adults were dealing with at the time at Columbine and at our school about all the mental health issues that probably were starting to arise after that shooting.
You know, it's funny that you say that, because I don't even really remember a lot of that, even the words mental health or mental awareness, as far as being so much of the discussion at the time. My story is probably a lot different as far as how I was affected, because I was going to school down south in Castle Rock, Douglas County. And when that happened, I was a senior. So we're, you know, senioritis, we're at the end of it. And so, you know, that springtime, and on the precarious day of 420, you know, and that was a very big ditch day for our seniors. And it's funny, because me and my best friend, we had ditch that day. And, you know, looking back, it's funny how you kind of went through your typical high school life, and something like that happened. And it was really not funny, but comical that I was ditching that day and ditching school. And it kind of being like I was at the same time being, you know, drawn away from school, and something had happened out of school. But I found ourselves watching the news at Chili's, and watching the news and just in such disbelief. But then we were locked out of our school. They had locked down all the schools. And so we couldn't even go back. And my parents were, you know, calling me, obviously. And they didn't really understand what was going on either. But it was just this mass confusion. And I had worked at a golf course at that time. And I had worked with a lot of kids from Columbine. Peter Forsberg, it just kind of sticks in my head. So if you're listening, or you know, hear your name here, and it's obviously a very, you know, Peter Forsberg. It's just like the Avalanche player. But and I remember, you know, Maurice and all these guys I used to work with, and they never came back to work. And that was the last I had seen of them, and for obvious reasons. And it's just funny how life changed so dramatically the day after, and then therefore after. But we brought up Columbine and kind of the resurfacing of it, and it kind of being this hot topic still 20 years later. And if you watch Bowling for Columbine, not to say, you know, politics not included, Michael Moore, obviously, he's a, you know, a great filmmaker. You know, and the way he makes these documentaries of, you know, try to get as much fact out there and really build a story about, you know, some of the things that revolve around such a big trauma or something, big topic. But the fact was that he was making was 20 years later, it is still just as valid. The movie is just as valid, has same points. And by his own words and accounts, it's gotten worse over the past 20 years. And you alluded to the fact that we are here to talk about mental health. This podcast is very much made for a discussion and conversations around just mental health. And I think being in the field now for roughly, 2 years myself, and you've had about 12 years experience. But your whole experience really kind of can start as like that being one of those first deals. I mean, you've been in childcare, you've been in a lot of things around that, but from a traumatic experience and your first kind of mental health, I think, issue to be faced as, and being a high schooler, how did that impact your path going into therapy? And, what does that mean for mental health right now? And then now looking at Bowling for Columbine 20 years later,
Yeah.
just as valid. And now they're saying worse. Where does that kind of fit in your timeline? Why you did what you do, how you got here, but what does that speak to you? This 20 years later, the same thing.
Yeah, it definitely impacted me. All I remember thinking about was the shooters and who they were and what was happening to them. And I've been meant to be a therapist. I always believed my journey, my whole life. I pretty quickly learned that my passion was hearing people's stories, and in order to survive my own family and my own generational past of history, there's a lot of mental illness that has been generational in my family. And every generation maybe changes a little or shifts a little or maybe gets a little bit more healthy or more dysfunctional depending on your family. But this generational mental illness, it was really important for me around that time to start understanding what mental illness was. And so I had to understand, I always started looking at what are people's experiences right now. And so the shooters has always been what I've been interested in. No matter what shooting I'm thinking about is what was happening to them.
Yeah.
What was their life like at home? What were the kids saying and doing to them? It's not just a symptom. We don't get these symptoms of depression, anxiety, or suicide, or, have these tremendous violent acts without some sort of mental illness, some sort of suffering happening. And it's not to say that it makes any of it okay, but, the shooters are usually suffering in one capacity or have been for a very long time.
Yeah.
And it kind of evolves into some sort of a decision that can be catastrophic for our community, and it's still happening.
Yes.
So I really am continuing to fight for that and continuing to fight for our youth because our youth is just going through such a tremendous time. It's just a very challenging time for anyone. And now that there's so much about, they have a couple options when they're suffering, and a lot of what I see, and I do work for an organization called Second Wind Fund. So I am one of the top providers that they call in Colorado when there's a child under the age of 18 who is suicidal in the school. And so many of my calls with my clients are coming from different schools about counselors saying, hey, this kid is suicidal. There's enough depression here. They don't have insurance. They need treatment. And, and so that's really important. And what I am just seeing is that if we don't give them treatment and support, then that's where either options of the violence, which they've seen the shootings, they're still happening, and also, the killing of themselves. And sometimes it's both, right? Sometimes it's the shooting and then I kill myself. So they're very much interlinked and they're, desperate.
Yeah.
And they're in pain. And I'm just trying to make a difference and really provide a solution. I think that's the difference with me, is that I have found ways that are effective, and I believe that I do have something that can be part of the solution.
Yeah.
And so as a therapist listening to it happening over and over and over, I'm just constantly thinking, where's the solution? And we try a lot of different things. And but as a mental health provider, I'm lucky enough to actually create a solution, do a solution, work with the kids, and actually see how it works. And it is working. It's the children and the youth and the teens are getting better.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think, again, I think we're going to prelude to a lot of things on this show and what our future is, because we obviously have a very large plan, a very big vision for what you and I and our team would like to do.
Yeah.
And it's just been, it's been crazy, this roller coaster ride that we've been on for, relatively this last 2 years of really, explosive growth, us being able to really dive in and be impactful, be influential. But like you said, there's a lot of things that we kind of bring up, right? The stigma around mental health. And like you were saying, there's all these issues that are arising, but where are the solutions? What are these options on the table? And kind of speaking to that, I was actually looking on my phone because we're finding all these statistics, right? There's so many numbers around so many issues. And you just brought up like suicide and Second Wind, which is a great foundation and organization. but it was a CDC just came out with a report saying that suicide has tripled in youth between the ages, I think it was just here, 10 to 17. In the last 3 years, it's tripled. So, and then back to Columbine, and mass shootings, I saw the other statistic the other day I was telling you about, and, over 400 in a year, meaning that there's more than one a day in the U.S., and a mass shooting being defined as, 4 or more deaths occur at one time from one, shooting event. But that's just astronomical. And since Columbine, like we've had to deal with, like the Aurora Theater shooting, a first of its kind that changed the way movies are being played or marketed out. And Joker just released, and it's going to be the most likely going to be the highest grossing rated R movie of all time, and it's going to replace Deadpool. So, I start looking at culture itself, and you start looking around and you say, okay, like, so Columbine wasn't, big enough or a shock enough. And then so now it's in our theaters. And then it just came back around again, right? At the Highlands Ranch STEM shooting. We live 5-10 minutes away from, right down the road. And funny enough, it's about 15 minutes down the road from Columbine. And it's both in Littleton. It's happening in Littleton, and not to call out, a specific city, county, or whatnot, but this is a nationwide issue, of course, because you start bringing in Sandy Hooks, and you start talking about kids shooting kids, and how that hasn't stopped. But then, just these mass shootings in general of people shooting just groups of innocent. I mean, the Las Vegas, right? And we could sit here on and on and on. And that's not what the show's really about, but I think it's about talking about some of these issues and some of these current events that are happening around us. Because as parents, we have 2 children, 8 and 12 years old, one soon to be 13, and she's, I think, a little bit, older in some of her viewpoints. But, talking about these issues and bringing these up, but, it's not stopping. It's not, there's little to be, the future is bleak, if you will. I have a different outlook, and that's why I think we're on this show and why we're trying to create a voice and create an effort around what we've been doing, because it's been a culmination of our lives, where we live geography-wise in our state, how special Denver really is, and the kind of community that we do have, which is really, I think, opposes kind of the thought of these shootings happening in our state, but I think we're over that. I think that people are trying to be educated and be more aware of what is happening around them. But also, I think from like our standpoint is like we have children. It's a little bit different in my viewpoint from being a father of what am I trying to protect my kids, and not only protect them, because that's almost a false statement. I believe there's a lot of uncontrollable things. What am I educating them about? What am I doing? What am I showing them? And what does it really mean to be a parent? In our work, you work with so many various clients, and the work is so unique. But I think what the biggest unique thing that I want to talk today about and take some time up is therapy camp.
Yes.
Is this special sauce. It's this magic. It's the unicorn. It's that thing that nobody said they could catch, or that this could be done really. And I'm not saying that we do it to its fullest even. And I think that's why we're here to talk about it and, really get a community around this, because we've built a community, a very small community right now, but we want to take it there. And so just tell me about, I like you to kind of link from where we come talking about with Columbine and 20 years later to, what you are going through as a parent and in your practice, and some of those, I think, challenges and shortfalls, and then what's therapy camp?
Yeah. Well, I think that therapy camp has been, Blue Moon Therapy Camp is special. I love that you call it the special sauce. It's the solution that I mentioned earlier that I've created, as well as kind of this organic creation with this beautiful team that we have of very skilled counselors from various backgrounds, not all licensed professional counselors like myself, but a variety of backgrounds, which I'll talk a little bit more about them too. And Blue Moon Therapy Camp, it came from, after Columbine, there was a couple other big mental health things that happened in my chapter that led me to becoming a therapist. A little bit after Columbine, I had a lot more realization about my own family situation. Both my families came from my mother and my father. We grew up in Littleton as well. They grew up with a lot of mental illness, a lot of abandonment, a lot of death, a lot of, really living with parents who had untreated mental illness, severe untreated mental illness, and what that does to children in their unit and in their family, and how that changes the course of their future. So in order for me to understand my present, a lot of what I had to do is understand my dad's background, understand my mom's background, so
Your
that
history.
I could, my history.
Yeah.
How do I understand what's happening in my world as I was starting to become my own adult person?
Right.
And so that was a lot, and that led me to, CSU and Colorado State University, of course, and started to study human development and family studies, kind of continuing to pursue that. And then knowing that I wanted to go to graduate school and working with, children and families throughout the entire time. I know that my biggest thing, my friends, and I'm part of a sorority, Zeta Tau Alpha, and all my sorority friends would always tease me. I know all the Zetas out there, and they would tease me and they would say, it's not all about the children, Michelle. It's all about the kids to you. It's all about the kids. And I was 21 years old, but I already knew, and everyone around me already knew how passionate I was about the children. It is all about the children. It's about this next generation. And so my career led me into a graduate school program about being a family systems therapist at CU Denver, and one of the youngest people in my graduating class. I went straight from undergrad, so I started becoming a therapist really young. I think I started seeing my first child and family clients when I was 24 years old. And I remember doing things to try to look older, to try to I didn't know how I was going to, which is a lot of why I like working with children. And so since then, it's been 12 more years since I've been clinically counseling. And this evolution of working with children and families and the systems and trying to help the whole unit, which is what I focus on, has led me to therapy camp, because I had such a huge following of clients and families, because I'm a unique therapist that I'll treat multiple people in the family because I'm a systems therapist. So my caseload got bigger by just, treating this unit. Sometimes I'd treat families that were like 10 people big, or cousins or things like that. And therapy camp, I needed to find a way to do a couple different things. Therapy camp I had to find a way to break the stigma of mental illness and getting a counselor, because it's just such this private thing. It's confidential. You don't want your friends to know about it. Talking about me in high school, if I would have gotten a counselor after Columbine, and a lot of my friends probably did, but we didn't talk about it.
Something's wrong with you, right?
Yeah, something's
always wrong. It's a problem, or
Yeah, and parents felt that way too. Oh, I don't want anyone to know. My kid is in therapy. They go once a week. Don't tell anyone.
Yeah.
And so I needed to find a way to break through that, because it just wasn't working. And I had so many kids and families following me. The second issue is that 1 hour a week structure, which is what I did for years, which is very typical counseling.
Traditional counseling therapy out there.
It wasn't enough to deal with suicide. It wasn't enough time for me to appropriately treat major depression, major anxiety, panic attacks. And a lot of my clients came from really challenging homes, working with Medicaid families, and coming from children of child poverty and generational abuse, intervening with social services and trying to keep families together. So I had kind of these multiple issues, and therapy camp really was a breakthrough for me and my practice, where I had always done group therapy, and not a lot of people done that. I've been doing group therapy for years, and it was working and it was changing. And I started getting all my clients together and all the kids together that I was treating privately in all these different offices. I had 3 offices at the time, and I brought them all together, and we would do skills groups. And I would teach them about, I had this really special Valentine's Day one, where we had 12 girls, and we were talking about loving ourselves. And, we just were able to do so many different interventions and skills together as a unit of 12 kids. And I just really started to see a difference. And that's where, because it took away the stigma. Because if I say to a kid, therapy camp is combining individual therapy and all the interventions we do with a summer camp model. And who doesn't love summer camp?
I know, right?
I mean, summer camp.
And I want to kind of stop real quick and kind of go backwards a little bit, because I think there's the part of being aware and being educated, is sometimes it's just really like, you don't really become an expert in something until you really need to be. So like anything from car shopping to, I don't know, computers, I would pride myself on being somebody who can learn pretty much anything. But generally speaking, I think people are more inclined to learn something because out of necessity, right? So like in the world of mental health, my kid's got behavioral issues. He's crazy. He just won't stop jumping. He hits people. He's a biter, whatever it may be, right?
Climbs roofs.
He climbs roofs, or they call me loping now, not running away. But, the same issues that we talk about, right? And then the parents finally at their wits' end, and then they start educating themselves, right? Like, what are my resources? So for all the parents out there that are, in the middle, maybe at the beginning or whatnot, but maybe they're not even parents yet. And maybe they're just interested in, okay, I'm not a parent, but what you're kind of talking about is just mental health in general, right? And if we were just to take a screenshot, and I was asking you as a therapist in the industry, in the field, has much changed in traditional therapy? And so like when I think of it, right, I was raised culturally in a Korean home, 100% Korean. My parents immigrated, so I'm first generation. And it was a taboo. It was highly taboo. I have an aunt that is, mentally ill, and we weren't allowed to really talk about her. And she was just kind of referred to as, I hate to say it, but the crazy one, and we were scared of her, but she was super kind. And, it was just kind of like that. And you kind of just worked with it, but we never spoke of it, and you certainly weren't, it wasn't a high priority as far as being an illness. That's something that we should understand as a family or as kids or as her nephew. And so, I was really raised I think in a lot of different views, but in the same generation as that generation, we could say, I think was really kind of guarded. Like you said, it was embarrassing. It's, about stature. It's about, what will people think, right? Or this is wrong, or it's a bigger problem, right? Maybe this helplessness. And so, what I always thought was kind of like that psychiatric, like person on the couch, laying down, getting traditional therapy, not even looking at the person. And we had spoken about this quite a bit, my beliefs of like trusting a stranger is what it really comes down to. And I think that's the key argument I do hear now. I don't want to say I was converted, but, being a converted mental health, advocate, I think it's all about trust, and it's about the human trust. It's about, like you said, it's not just breaking a stigma. I think we can look on Facebook and we can see all the different things and messages and everyday pick me ups, and say break the stigma. Like mental health is not a bad thing, but is therapy really changing in a lot of ways as well? Was the approach changing? And I think, social media does help bring the guard down, and it allows people to still be, I think, interested. And it may push them over the edge to actually go and look for resources and support. But I think the overwhelming sense is still that I don't really need to tell my personal issues to a stranger. And I think that maybe from a judgment point of view, there's still that little bit of that, confidence, a self-esteem issue of like, are they perfect? Do they know something I don't know? Right? What makes them the, expert in this? And then, like I said, like now being kind of converted, and educating myself, and also having therapists now around me 24/7. I think they're, like you said, the secret sauce and therapy camp, and why we got to make, I like to try to make this from my perspective, because clinically, in the sense, I'm not really in that side of things, right? I run a business. I look at it from that lens, but being very, I think, appropriately, in the moment to know and to educate myself on even how to give therapy as well. It's funny. We just did a camp last night, and I was very much in that role on my level, but I have this comfort level now of talking to children about harder issues, about challenging things, without having to make them feel, like I'm judging them, or that they're wrong, or that it's their fault, you know? And I think that's what the program's given me, though, you know, the therapy camp. And when I say the special sauce, and you can go more into it from that view of what I'm saying, but it's about your approach. It's about like taking that guard down, but not making it a stated fact. You know, it's not like we're going to break down walls, you know? It's like sneakily almost like going in there and getting them to trust you by just being real humans, by caring for a person. And it takes about a year, right? It takes about a good year. And then once you get the kids cracked, it's almost like you got to do another year because you finally crack the parent guardian, right?
Yeah. It's a lot of trust to gain.
Yeah. And so, so do you see that like traditional therapy is still kind of just traditional, and there is still that stigma, but it's a real stigma?
Yeah, I think that definitely. I think that professionals in the field and professionals who are, you know, all over the country and professionals in my field, you know, the doctors and who study this and research this, there's a lot of changes that are happening. There's research and proof showing that, you know, for example, that dealing with PTSD, you know, is movement. Trauma needs movement. Trauma is in the body, and it's not this talk therapy piece. We can talk about it and we can get there, but this traditional model doesn't touch the physical symptoms of trauma and feelings and emotion, which are, you know, physical experiences. And so movement, which is a huge part of therapy program, and creating different environments that are safe, which is evidence-based for trauma. Children and families need to feel safe, and that takes a little bit of time, but just a safe environment, consistency, trust in the adults, and it's different at therapy camp. It's not just me anymore. I'm not the only therapist in the room. I might be the only licensed therapist in the room, but the team of mentors and counselors, you know, we work with about a team of 12 for about kids of 45 at the highest, 20 at the lowest. We kind of range depending on what we're doing that day. And it's like we're collectively supporting this unit of clients from all of our different professional backgrounds. So it has really changed. And I think there's a lot of things happening, you know, and yoga is huge, and it's big in the research right now about how yoga is being used by doctors and by psychiatrists to treat severe, you know, complex trauma or PTSD, or, you know, depression and suicide and anxiety because of its unlocking and treating the body. When we're moving our body, it actually is working to alleviate symptoms of mental illness. And we need more programs like that are incorporating it, similar to Blue Moon Therapy Camp, which it's, you know, movement is huge.
Right. And so like therapy camping, you know, using a lot of the foundational things that traditional therapy is.
Yes.
And some of the newfound therapies. I always feel like the public is like, you know, 5-10 years behind everything always, as far as what the industry would allow an expert or somebody in the field, a professional in the field know. So like you're saying, right, there's all these studies or a lot of things like that, but true to form, the public is.
Yeah, I think that's a great difference. The professionals are working on creative options, and I definitely have been. But the public, the families, the schools, their only option is traditional. Find yourself a counselor. You know, 1 or 2 times a week. You have to either pay for it out of pocket or use your insurance, and it's still sometimes it feels like parents are, you know, disappointed, or they're embarrassed, or it's definitely not something like that they're allowed to talk to their friends and be like, oh yeah, I got the great therapist, or yeah, we got therapy today. Versus therapy camp, the community starts to accept it and they feel proud of it. You know, like you ask any of my current therapy camp kids and be like, who are you? And they'll be like, we're Blue Moon, and they have proud, and they're like, they tell their friends about therapy camp. I have all their friends asking me. So many times I have kids come up to me and be like, can I come to camp? You know, in camp is an approachable word. It's changing. It's changing the way therapy is perceived. It's like, we don't care if there's therapy happening, you know, it's like camp with friends, you know, and so, and we're tying in these different types of therapy. It's not just this talk therapy, you know, we're tying in music to teach the kids skills. We're teaching them that music can be healing, that art can be healing, that horses, we do a lot of equine therapy, you know, bringing children of all different backgrounds with the anxiety, depression, and suicide and putting them around these huge animals.
I love the paddleboarding, the roller skating, you know, the stuff I did when I was a kid, but like, Now you get to talk about a little bit about how you're feeling about it, right?
Yeah, therapy camp on paddleboards. I mean, Eric, you and I have taken 45 children paddleboarding. I don't even know how many times, six to 8 times.
Yeah.
And not only it's teaching them the paddleboarding skill
Right.
of self-confidence and learning to move our body, but I literally was doing therapy sessions. I had a client once read me a letter on the middle of the lake with all of our friends around us from her father, who was in jail, who she couldn't bring herself to read, brought it in her swimsuit, ready to read it. And here I am allowing her to paddle on her board, and she's reading this letter to me.
Yeah.
Or I think even I was, it was just this interesting therapy, traditional blended with paddleboarding, created this really powerful moment.
Yeah.
Like, I'll always remember, and I'm sure she will too. And, so paddleboarding has just been really impactful and just something that really surprised me. It was one of my dreams to bring clients out onto water because I experienced my own mental illness relief. And I know you did too. It's something we found together that we both love. And being on the water away from the land, like, something about regulating our system, calming. It's just very peaceful. And all that movement. Yeah. Which could be used for physical therapy and for trauma.
What's interesting too is like when you start doing all these things. So Michelle and people who know her, but it's always kind of this thing like you love a show, you love a themed party. We actually met each other because we were socials in college.
Yes, I do.
And I was in fraternity. She was in the sorority.
Yep.
And we both threw parties for our respective organizations. But, I have the same, I think I have the same need for the show, like the moment, a memory, and I knew the power of making something visually over the top because I knew it would make a lasting memory. And that's the stuff that people go back on campus and talk about. Dude, were you at Gelorama? Were you at Arctic Luau? And it wasn't about that. They would tell the stories of like, did you see how big and grand it was, right? It's the like
epic party,
the
moment, the memory.
And I feel like Coloradans especially, like we're experiential, like Coloradans chase the sun in snow in summer. We're on the water. We're hiking. We got 14ers. And, you go on Instagram and it looks like everyone in Colorado, like all we do is wake up, hike, and then like, paragliding and then paddleboarding and then skiing all in the same day too, right? All in the same day. But this kind of constant need, and then you bring in and then layer in social media, right? And then you load in all these things where kids, as mostly now, are being fed so much information. But what does it take to get a kid's attention these days? That's a big thing, in my opinion, not only as a father, but, now working in this field, but just seeing the outerlying problems in the world, of like, engagement. We're so lucky in America to be economically where we are at, even though we are faced with the same, poverty issues and same other socioeconomic things. But I feel like there's this comfort in our country that we're allowed to be free, free to choose to do things. And, we have some of these luxuries around us. But kids growing up in this culture is like this, I am up and I have a screen and it's just attacking me. And then I have this sense I need to have followers, and popularity is no longer just a popularity contest in this small bubble of their middle school world. They are engaged now to try to be this popular person in a global sense, that I want 10,000 followers. Dad, if I get 100,000 followers, can I get a car? Can I get that dress? Can I get something? And they're monetizing it. They are putting a value to it. And when we go on and we, go to your, Facebook and we look at how many followers and, how many likes and how many posts and TikTok. I was on this morning and it's so funny, people, because I was literally like, Michelle caught me and I was like educating myself on TikTok because my daughter uses it and she's a pro at it. Then I was like, you know what? I probably should just hire my daughter to help me and take 30 minutes of her time for her dad to do TikTok, which I'm probably going to start doing today. But it's funny, right? Like the level of engagement needed now to get a child's attention in a world where they get no attention and they do the most obscene things to get the attention, right? And so I'm going to scratch a lot of things on the surface today because we could talk for literally days upon months on all these things that we literally have daily conversations about just in work, right, with these kids and how we're impacted and how they're impacted. But you were saying, like this therapy camp and, all these different values that we can put on it, and it's an alternative to so many different things, right? But then when I see it and coming down to it, it's about, I think the public interest wants to always say it's the parent's fault in a lot of ways, like it's an easy scapegoat. So when we talk about like Columbine and we talk about Klebold and Harris, right? And you yourself was like, what made these guys do it, right? Trenchcoat Mafia. And I always looked at it, it was like, well, yeah, didn't you see it coming, right? Like we had been watching movies, and I brought up to you right before Breakfast Club. This is a classic movie, people, right? And we identified the challenges that kids are having in school way back then when it was, it wasn't even about minorities or even about, cultural diversity or any of those issues. It was literally just the same popularity, social issues, social economic issues, right? And then here we are today again, right? 30 years later, 40 years later, and we can still put on the same bad movies, and we can kind of like make joke of it, but our kids are still doing that. But now I say it's at a global sense. Now I'm not popular in this world. And as the world closes with, I think, the technology advancements, I feel like their world gets bigger in a lot of ways, and they get lost even more.
Yeah, isolation.
Right. And this world especially, like where we have all gone and put our faces now into the phone.
Yeah.
And so I would love to sit here and I could blast parents probably all day long about what are you not giving your kids. But then we have to start, because that's the other thing, right, that we do in this program in therapy camp and at Blue Moon. We've evolved out of necessity. Out of everything that we try to do and we try to help one section of this, it always ends up being the whole family system. And it's not one or two or three individuals that are wholly responsible for it. It's everybody in that family. And at any given point, which we will kind of get to at the end of the show, really, and where the show will always kind of is going to be meant for doing, but it's everyone everywhere, right? And Blue Moon started this campaign. I personally have this passion to start this campaign, and we are pushing this effort into, everyone everywhere is affected by a mental health issue, a disorder, or some trauma. And it doesn't mean that you're crazy. It doesn't mean that something is wrong with you. It just means that everybody needs to recognize that all systemic issues come from a human point of view. It's a mental thing. You can break your arm and it's a physical problem, right? I could have high blood pressure and I can go to a doctor and they can tell me that. But the mental aspect of this, and I think if we all took a real gut check and we stepped back from the country and we looked at it and we said, you know what, let's grade ourselves. Let's grade the country on its mental health right now. From an A being the most excellent to F being the worst. I would have to say that there's not going to be a lot of people out there that believes that we're above a C. I personally have a hard time feeling and saying that we are better. And it's not about saying that we're not better, right? And it's a big American thing to say that we're better at everything. But I think it's even more American to say that there are real issues that don't really have to be a one-sided issue. It's not about just the politics. It's not just about how much money you make. They're all very closely related. And so, going back to kind of like the families that that you try to help, and it started with kids. But then can we really blame parents? Because look at the world the parents are living in now, right?
Yeah, definitely not.
Bowling for Columbine, one of Michael Moore's key stories in that movie, as he's filming this about Columbine, there was a 6-year-old, African-American boy that shot a 6-year-old white girl in the face. And, how could that not be in the movie? Because it's something just above me as far as like tragedy levels, but you kind of learn of, some of the things that were happening in the child's life. And his mother being shipped and being bused to, go to a job in a affluent suburb at a mall to work 2 jobs, but was literally gone from her home, 9-12 hours a day, and then bused back. And while she was gone working on a state mandated issue or program, he went to school and they had been kicked out of their home, moved in with their uncle, and then he found his uncle's gun, and then later shot this girl at school, and she wasn't even there. And his mom's rarely there.
Yeah, there was a lot of time he was away from his mother and not watched by her,
And that's happening a lot, right?
After school, yeah, latchkey kids and aftercare, no childcare, no aftercare, no weekend support for the parents. Kids are younger and younger and younger, staying home alone. Right.
And as we kind of go into the, the election year and the campaign and all this is going to be, we can't hear anything but impeachment right now.
Right.
But we know that that's going to fast change into this whole election year. And we have a whole new set of, different things that are coming up into, I think, highlight, right? Like, what's the highlight reel now? What are the big topics in American politics? And mental health is always going to be a staple up there. It's tied to so many issues that we face as Americans. But at the same time, right, there is a larger gap happening. The economics, again, I got to go to, right? I'm an economics kind of guy. And when the gap is getting bigger and the middle class, is basically not really there anymore. But we all know, and we know from personal experience, and you don't have to look very far to know that it's hard and it's expensive, and especially expensive to live in this country, right? In our state. We are in Denver, and we have, some of the biggest housing crises from, a standpoint of, well, who can afford to live in Denver anymore, And we're putting it on parents to say, you know what, afford your life in this, great state, afford your life, afford your kids, and give them all your time and teach your children and educate them. And what I'm really I think it boils down to is that community is no longer the same community as I think what we all thought great America was before. I came from a very, a very close family where it's very strong, but we kind of took care of each other, and we didn't really socialize, so we're a very introverted family in a lot of respects, and I feel like that's even more place common now, but it's not even out of choice, it's out of circumstance. And so therapy camp, right? I think, what is it about bringing back, it takes a village to raise one child.
Yeah.
And when you have families of having 5, 6, 7, multiple children, single parents, and you just start stacking things up against a single parent anyway. I couldn't imagine, being single and doing this without you, and having this team effort constantly. So I don't think that's really talked about a lot. And that's why I just wanted to kind of bring it up, because I think, we can talk for days again about, what it looks like on a brochure or on a website. And folks are going to, look into it and maybe be interested. But I feel like very much the podcast, and this is why we are doing these, interviews and such, because again, from the campaign standpoint, everyone everywhere is affected, no matter what your circumstance is. Somebody who's affected, or you are affected, right? And it's going to be our purpose here as well as to share our stories. I will tell more about my life, and I want to share my story. You have shared a lot about your story. And I think that's one of those really nice things about empathy, is when you start to get to know somebody's story, that in itself does take down walls, and it takes down the defensiveness, and it takes down blame. And then you can start really kind of looking at it, I think, a little more objectively even, and say, wow, you're a single parent of 3. You have to maintain a job, a rent, a mortgage, and your expenses of your life. And then at the same time, right, you're expected to have a hold on these 3 children that went through most likely a divorce or abandonment issue, right?
Yeah.
And then you're supposed to be the sheriff. You got to be the lover, the sheriff. You got to be all encompassing, right? And you got to be responsible when they're suffering. And they're driving 30, 45, 50. You kind of know the person I'm talking about too, even as the example. But she's got to drive, 50 minutes away for her job. So there's a 2-hour commute. And now in Denver, it's going to turn to 3 hours very soon. We only have 2 highways. It's not really smart. But her whole day is taken up at her job, and she gets home 6, 7 o'clock at night.
Yeah.
And then you're supposed to wrap up, educate, figure out what's happening in school, what's going on in their life emotionally. And she's got 3 of them to do it with in about 3 hours till bedtime. If you have a bedtime, if you have a routine, right? I don't see how we can blame parents at that point. I don't see how we can blame anybody but ourselves, our communities, and one is, why try to stop blaming anybody? And like you said, is what's the solution then? And where are our options then? And so that's why I want to say those things, is because I feel like therapy camp is so much more than just a program, but it's an actual effort. It's an actual something that you are trying to recreate a village. You're not alone, folks. And we know that it's embarrassing to say that you can't afford your life, but I think, there's more than 50-60% of this state that can't afford their life. Probably astronomically higher than that. Just read up on it. The big topic here is erasing student loan debt. 1.5 trillion in student, private, and public assistance. And now the only topic is just get rid of it. They're never going to pay it back. 1 out of 5 people on it are on default 90 days or more, making $1,000 payments a month for some job that they never got after school, right? So there's all these different things, and I feel like there are some changes in policies and all whatnot, but what is it about that? What is it about the recreation of the village? What have you found out? What are you trying to do? And how deep does it go? How much time and effort does it really take to involve yourself with just one family, let alone 45, 50 families that we do serve at this point? But
yeah. Well, I like that word. It is community. It is a village. And this is what we offer. We take away the stigma, and we're opening up Blue Moon Therapy Camp for the first time ever to kids outside of my small network. Well, not that small, 45 children. All my referrals are people who've known me, who've worked with me. I've been treating their families for years.
Almost 100 clients in that whole list, including the adults.
Yep, we've treated almost 100 children, as well as, currently, it's about 91 active clients if you include the children, as well as the mothers and the aunts and the family members that we're supporting, because, we have to stabilize the unit to take care of the family. We have to help the kids. We have to help the mother. And I'm a firm believer, in Blue Moon Parent Support Program is run by Marta Gofredo, who's an RN, and she is extremely skilled at understanding women, and her working with the mothers and the grandmothers and providing this additional support while I'm working with the children, it allows them both to have their own advocate. It allows, them to have part of their community and village, for the moms to be able to complain to Marta Gofredo about their life and their stress and everything, and Marta be able to provide woman-to-woman support and skills based on her story and her life and her being at that different chapter of her life. And that's been huge, because why I want the mothers and the grandmothers and the aunties and the women of the family, the matriarchs, and the fathers too. We do more with the women at this point. We'd like to reach the fathers as well, but a lot of the fathers aren't involved with these family units, is that when we help the women and reduce their stress and help their self-care and help them learn skills, then that helps the children. Because if the moms are a little better taken care of, then they can function with their children, with their families a little bit better, instead of everyone just being on this empty battery all the time. And so back to the village, is Blue Moon Therapy Camp is creating a village, and it's taking away stigma. So if you are that single mom and you need a place for your kids to be after school, and you want them to get those skills and that love and that homework support and that food, we do everything from transporting the kids from school to our program, to feeding the kids a hot, nutritious meal and teaching them about the food. The kids are learning how to cook. They're learning how to do chores. They're learning how to be part of their community. They are a part of their own community and village, and they have this strength in numbers within each other. And they have, so if an 11-year-old girl from middle school, I got a call earlier this morning, was feeling suicidal and feeling isolated and not feeling like her needs are being met by her parents who are working hard. A lot of these CEO parents, a lot of these parents who have beautiful, high-paying jobs, but that, work is hard. And the CEO parents are also a community that I want to be able to help, and that I'm helping, because they're just trying to do, provide for their family, which they're doing. The kids can have, as much financial freedom as they need within some of these family units, but that the kids are still suffering. They're stuck into the technology. They don't have a village. They don't have a community. They're home alone waiting for their parents, and they're becoming angry. The kids are angry and resentful of those fathers and those mothers who are CEOs. CEOs. Like, you love your job more than me. You don't care. You're not here. You
Right.
don't know what my life looks like between 4 p.m. and 7 p.m.
Yeah.
And then you get here and all you care about, you're depleted. And so it's not a judgment on the families. It's not their fault.
No.
But their kids are suffering too because there's no community, there's no village, and they need that help too.
Yeah.
And so therapy camp recreates a village that, one, hey, I want to go to camp because there's my friends there.
Yeah.
I like those friends. We do cool things. We learn things. And the big thing is, like what you're saying, is if we got a group together, like of all the parents who can't really afford their life, and that feeling of like, I'm just a little over my head and I'm stressed. What happens is when you put a bunch of families together who all are in the same situation, it starts to normalize it.
Yeah.
It starts to make the stress go down. It starts to feel like, oh, I'm not the only one.
I'm not being picked on.
No, I
not
don't
being
have
singled
to be
out,
embarrassed
right?
about this. I can talk about how I got a little over my head and I don't like my job, but I don't want to change because I don't want to sell my house. And the kids, that's what's so powerful about the therapy camp and the group therapy unit, is that you put a bunch of kids who all have CEO parents together, or who all have parents who have big committed jobs, or moms who are gone. And all of a sudden the kids get to talk about it with me and within the unit of like, yeah, these are the things that do suck.
Yeah.
But all those things that maybe you can't give your kids because you're busy, that's what therapy camp replaces. It replaces the family unit. So, we are talking about the child's need. How do we take care of a whole child? There's deficiencies in what the child is needing from a survival basis when we look at shootings.
Right.
I don't know what it was. I don't know what it was with a lot of the things that happened, but I know that they were hurting and something was missing and they were suffering with something. And if they would have come to therapy camp, let's say I would have gotten those kids into my therapy camp, let's say when they're in 8th grade. Middle school's huge. And all of a sudden, I'm able to see them with their peers, and I'm able to check in with them before it's too late, and to teach them how to communicate what's going on and what's wrong. They can have their secrets,
right?
And there's things that they can't tell their parents at that age. My 12-year-old daughter doesn't tell me about her secrets anymore. That's age appropriate.
Yes,
they have to tell their peers. They have to find another adult, but they have it. And so creating a village where your kids can be somewhere and actually talk about it and be around other kids and get it and not feel so isolated. Decreasing isolation is going to reduce their depression right away.
Yeah.
Giving them tools for their anxiety, like so much pressure at school. A lot of kids are pulling their hair out at school, they're cutting themselves, they're licking their lips so badly. These visual symptoms of anxiety, there's panic attacks. I bet if all the middle school girls are listening to me right now and have said, have you ever felt overwhelmingly depressed about the way you look or your body, or you want to be beautiful, you want to be like those teenager girls on TikTok or on the news, and like your body's just not there and you're mad, and so what are you doing? I'm not eating, or I'm cutting myself, or I'm trying to get attention from my social media community and the sexual kind of predators that are out there looking for these girls who are vulnerable, and so there's a lot that happens when they're not in care. There's a lot that happens when they're just left to deal with all these normal things without us. And so a village allows us to protect our children and to give them tools to handle the hard things in their life while they're still impressionable before high school.
Yeah. I think you bring up a really good point as far as, the point is that kids, just like adults, have different versions of themselves. We live in a culture right now that we're saying, find your genuine self, right? That social media is making it very hard for people to fake how they act in front of different groups of people or types of people, right? I think we're all very much guilty of it. Some people, I think, press into it a little bit more and kind of label fake. And some people are just who they are and are kind of pompous, right? And so like either extreme, and I really do feel like this in life in general, that there's always the balance, right? Where you can do just a little bit of both sides, and as long as you don't piss off anybody too bad, then you're doing okay, right? But anytime, no matter what it is, when you go into an extreme of one thing or the other, I think you kind of lose yourself and it's unbalancing, and then extremes happen, right? I think when you're saying about, kids and,
how they act without their parents around, without adults around, right? And I think if you've ever heard kids at a mall or at a cafeteria or in the backseat of your car and you're driving them somewhere and they kind of forget that their dad is actually driving them, and you hear them, you hear how they talk to them, or each other, their peers, their friends. And the first time I heard my daughter doing that in a way that was making her seem pretty mean girlish, it took me back, like you always say, like I would defend my son till, he's just perfect. And that's the thing I think I get because I'm his father and I love my kids so much and I love my son so much that I kind of do favoritism and all that good stuff. But he's different. I'm glad we have a boy and a girl and it's two totally different, subjects. But for the first time, middle schooler and being a father of a middle schooler. But I think that's a really very unique thing. And I think it's a very big, it's a perception that I think a parent has to have and an empathy that they will never really show you because they're at a time when they're trying to figure out who they really are. And they're going to play many different faces and they're going to say out a lot of different things and play out a lot of different things. And it is absolutely your responsibility, I think, to guide them and to show them and to, to their best interest and to your best interest of giving them the best they can to be a good person, right? We all want good kids. We want, good moral principles from our children. I hope that is.
Yeah, and happy kids.
Right?
We don't like the mental illness. We don't want them to suffer in their rooms alone and lead to something.
Right.
I mean, how many parents have experienced, the serious sides of all of a sudden finding out that your child is suicidal and you had no idea.
Yeah.
Like that's the worst thing for a parent.
And I feel like it's a commonplace reality where like, something bad happens to their child and then they have to like go back into history and then you start looking back and, especially in suicide, we've been there, been affected by it.
Family has been.
And your stepbrother, my brother-in-law, and when he passed away in the fashion that he did and, the way he took his life and just, it's really hard not to take so much from it. And I don't want to press into it because obviously it will be a topic that we will discuss at a later time.
Yeah.
But the reality is then you start looking backwards, right? When it's already too late and you start looking at who their friends really were. And then you start looking at their posts and then you go, oh my God, I didn't even know and realize those things. And it's really funny how we wait till it's too late, in a lot of sense. And when you can do that right now. Yeah. But what I feel like what you do, Michelle, and what Blue Moon does and what we do, especially in therapy camp, is allow kids to be real kids with each other, but with real problems and talk about real things with kids. And it's like, raise your hand if your father or mother have been to jail.
Yeah.
And then now it's like they'll share that with each other. And then they look around, they go, oh my gosh, it's like most of us. And that's actually the minority is the ones who think not having problems is a good thing, right? And it's almost, I hate to say it, but almost making it cool because I feel like, again, bad attention, good attention doesn't really matter. Kids want attention. And if they figure out that somebody will give me attention if I start telling them that I am suicidal, and I think parents and people want to believe that that's why kids do it most times, is just for the attention and it's not really a bigger issue. You're just saying that, right? I don't want, because it's hard to really believe your child would want to take their life.
Yeah, I hear that a lot.
Right? And
He's
so
not really suicidal. He's not really suicidal.
Thank you.
She was just upset,
And then they don't really know how they talk or who their friends are or really have engaged. And like I said before, it's not to blame them.
No.
It's circumstance. They're not allowed to. Our culture doesn't allow you to know your children the way you would love to know your children, right?
There's just some things that kids are not going to tell parents because you are in charge of their discipline. You're in charge of, they don't want to disappoint you. So many girls tell me or kids tell me,
and so
I don't want to tell mom because I don't want her to get mad at me.
And
but
so,
I will tell you.
Right? And
right?
so like traditionally right now, minus Blue Moon Therapy Camp, minus Blue Moon.
Yeah.
Who's the liaisons? Who are the ones right now? And if you say the teacher and educator, I'm going to, I'll go on the deep end. School teachers, I can't even say how much, like literally what you guys do for how little you're paid. That is just absolutely what's happening in Chicago. I'm with you, Chicago.
Yeah.
Right? It happened in Denver too. And you should strike and you should get yours. But it's a massive amount of you're just so much against teachers that I don't even want to involve them in the topic of who's the liaisons to the parents. We already have enough of that. Mentally, though, emotionally, Michelle, who else are the liaisons between the children and the affected to their parents and their guardians?
You know, what I see in all these years is it is their peers. You know, their peers.
Are they going to their parents, though?
They're not going to their parents. You know, they're getting caught by their peers like so many times. Like, I'm not saying that, you know, most of the time when a child is identified as feeling depressed or suicidal and then somehow they get a referral to me, their peers, they feel most open talking about it with their peers. They're either posting it on some sort of Facebook or some sort of video or writing some sort of letter. They're showing up with marks on their arms or marks on their skin, and their peers are concerned. They're going to open up with their peers and say, hey, I'm
so 13-year-old to 13-year-old.
Totally 13-year-old to 13-year-old, 11-year-old, 11-year-old, 10-year-old to 10-year-old. I mean, I'm dealing with a lot of 10-year-olds who are going through this and the bullying and what happens. So whether it's a trigger, it's just a stress in their family or a stress at school without any coping skills or any tools in that isolation, you know, then they're going, you know, they're in depression. They're not sleeping. They're not eating. And it's this kind of domino effect. But it is the peers who usually get the first, and then they report it to a counselor.
There you go.
And they report it to the
usually a school counselor, right?
Oh, always a school counselor, because the school counselors get the referrals for any kids who are doing anything that may be a cause for harm, you know. And then the school counselor assesses the child and then recommends to the parent they find a counselor. Then they give them a list, and then they find me. And then I'm able to intervene with the schools. And Blue Moon Therapy Camp does a lot. We do a ton of case management intervention in the schools so that we can be a liaison directly with the school counselors to help our kids.
And that's where I was kind of alluding to as well.
Sure.
So you kind of figure out a good place to be a liaison, truly, how to relay and not only be a liaison, but support the family and the parents as well. Get them very much included. Communication, all of it. I mean, we start relying on each other. We start texting each other. We start calling, right? And then start doing extra things outside of even our camp that really makes this a village, really makes this a community, right? But full circle moment here, because we're going to wrap up on time here soon. But, you know, you made a very harsh fact here. So since Columbine and 20 years ago, and we have this shooting, and now we have more than one mass shooting a day, we can say it's getting worse. I think absolutely getting worse, right? And so in 20 years, and what you say is probably one of the key liaisons of reporting or just to catch it. And we're talking about preventative here, right? We want to do this before the school gets shot up or a crisis happens.
This is what Blue Moon Therapy Camp is. It's preventative.
It's a preventative.
For more serious mental health situations.
Right. Isn't it funny, though, how mental health is being taken out of schools? That budget cuts are happening at an extensive rate.
Yes.
And that the support in the school. So I would be hard pressed to really have that conversation about the Highlands Ranch STEM shooting and say that there were places and things in place to at least cast a wide net to be a preventative care, right? To maybe catch one or two of these kids and not just report them, not just single them out as being a red flag or suicidal or that's the crazy kid that's going to shoot our school up, right? Like, let's make them even feel more outside the box. Let's make them feel more like a criminal, right? I would be, you know, I'm going to say, you know, that there isn't. I would say that as a parent, knowing that my child goes to a great school that has that, you know, I'm as engaged as probably the average parent is. Obviously, Michelle does a great job. She takes education as, I think, a passion. I'm a little bit different, but at the same time, I feel like, you know, I am your average, you know, parent. I'm engaged. I help with homework. I go to meetings. Don't go to all of them. Sometimes my kid goes to schools late, you know, like not trying to be the perfect person, but I know for a fact that I don't feel like there is anything out there to catch my kid. I feel like there's little less because of just numbers, purely math, that one teacher cannot give an emotional state of mind, I think, you know, test or update to each individual parent. And so we can't rely on that as being the preventative measure. We can't rely on that as being the early detection, right?
No, they can't be the therapist to all their students. Of course not.
And so I guess, to put it bluntly, does that make sense? 20 years later from Columbine, 20 years that we've had all these different experiences, and 20 years later, we are the adults. We are the ones that are the influential, the most impactful, the CEOs running companies, right? We graduated knowing that was happening. That happened to us.
Yeah.
That's who we are,
Yeah.
in a sense. That suburb is still a suburb, and it's still happening right down the street from that suburb, right?
Yeah.
How can we sit back as adults now, as the decision makers, and say that what was good enough for them 20 years ago is good enough for them now?
Yeah.
Am I wrong? Do you feel, because I'm asking you from as like, you being the professional from that side, you do have very much more conversations with people who are trying to do what you are doing as well, putting more options on the table.
Yeah.
But could you sit there right now and say that the schools and the school system is being supported in a way that will allow them to prevent some of these things?
No, they need more support. They need programs like mine to come in and take the kids that come into the counselor's office that they feel a little bit like, I know this kid is suffering for the reasons that I can tell, and I don't have the time or the capacity to treat their mental health while I'm a school counselor.
Mm-hmm.
And because school counselors' positions are different and are tailored to a different objective, and for us to be able to come in and take those kids that you're concerned about and take them into therapy camp and give them a village and give them pre-screening and give them therapy in a way of its camp and take away the stigma and support the parents and be like, look, we got this.
Yeah.
Let us take care of your kids for a little while and let us help you. Let us be a part of your village. That is really the way that I really want to see things change, because it's helping not only the parents feeling like, I don't know where to take my kid, I don't know.
Right.
At the same time, it's helping the school counselors being like, there's this in-between ground. At the same time, we're preventing for the community big issues that are happening. And even if it is losing one child to suicide, it affects the entire system and community.
Right.
And, I think a lot about Montrose and what they just went through, Montrose, Colorado, of having those series of suicides back to back to back in their students. I want to go to Montrose. I want to bring therapy camp to Montrose and show them I can help not only kind of maybe stop the epidemic and help give the kids and the youth something different, a resource, some other way of healing, because now they're all suffering. All those kids at Montrose are feeling and suffering just like we did at Columbine. Yep. And it's such a small town in Montrose, I can't even imagine how they're dealing with the mental health issues that are coming from so many loss of kids in that community that are back to back to back. So, wanting kids to come into Bloom and Therapy Camp, wanting to be able to be a support to both the schools and to the parents and to create a village is really what I'm passionate about. And, I really want to see it happen. I want to continue. I want to expand the amount of children and families that I'm treating and that we're helping and that we do as a unit. And that's why I'm here.
So we're going to kind of, wrap up a little bit here on some of the initiatives and things I was saying beforehand, and kind of like this was our intro show, and we've touched on so many things. Yeah. But that's why I think the intent was, us to scratch the surface on a lot of things, get our, hopefully get a following and, viewers interested and listeners there. It's our hope, one is, so this podcast will be called Everyone Everywhere Podcast. And it is exclusively for this campaign effort to break the stigma of mental health. And it's to have more conversations. I think the thing that's going to bring it all together is through this podcast is we would like to really share our stories and hear your stories out there. And Montrose, if you're listening, it is absolutely, I think, Blue Moon, we are... I think in about a month here, we're going to have our first kind of special event to bring out into the private pay world. And we're going to bring camp out to the public. And we're going to try to serve as much people out in communities and neighborhoods out there. But I think one of the more exciting things, and it's to Montrose, we're coming to you. We're going to take the circus on the street, right? We have just a awesome group of people that work for us. Just an awesome team that cares. and is no different than anybody else out there. And we are trying to do what we can do to help. And follow the lead, and we found a solution. It's not the solution, but it's a great option on the table that we feel has been working for the last 2 years. And if you want to call it a beta or whatever you want to call them, but they're the original family, our original Blue Moon camp of kids. But they were some of the most severe. They're the underprivileged, living under the poverty line, very different, cultural backgrounds, diverse ethnics, races and whatnot. So I think it proved to us all the things that we're capable, what we can do, but more importantly, what this new village, what this community, this camp, how powerful it really is by giving it back to people who feel isolated and alone.
Yeah.
So we're taking it on the road. We're going to wrap up the circus. One of our favorite shows is The Greatest Showman. And it's really funny, people. We're going to tell you our story of how we got here. And it hasn't always been good. It's actually, a lot of challenge, a lot of uphill, but a lot of great moments. And we've had a lot of success up to this point of saying, it is time to share, and it's time to really put our money where our mouth is. And go out there and help Montrose and help Watkins and help, Eagle County and Summit County and Pueblo and
Littleton
and Home and Denver. There's so much need out there, but we have a plan, and we have a plan to kind of, do one in Denver and, I think draw from this well of so much resources here in Denver, where our capital sits, and then going out remotely to another city and outlying one. The Eastern Plains folks, if you can just do a little Google, you should see how bad it is getting out there on our Eastern, plains, as well as some of the isolated mountain towns out there. Like Michelle said, Montrose, back to back suicide, meth addiction, drug abuse. These are happening at an alarming rate. And we know that we can't just sit back in our little comfy office in Denver. We were trying to get a, mansion on the hill and create this, Harry Potter Hogwarts, of things. But the more we understand and the more we see it, it's not about how we can bring people to us. It's how we can go to them. And that has been the defining decision, defining choice for us of saying that, we're not going to sit back anymore. We're not going to try to get people to come to us. We're just going to go to them. Mm-hmm. We're going to go to sponsors. We're going to go to donors. Going publicly, all these programs that we've been talking about, we will go into more, I think, detail. But this podcast and Everyone Everywhere and sharing your story is also our, I think, effort to really reach out to the public and also our partners in crime out there, mental health providers. Like most, if you go to, Tennyson Center for Children and their website, I'm giving you props right now because you are one of those places that when I was doing my research, you do it well. You have your plan, you're sticking to your guns, and you do what you do well, but there's a place for all providers. And, they do have a mission to align themselves now, to collaborate, right? To have a coalition of sorts. And Blue Moon would love to be the ones out there and be the remote leg of this. We want to be the legs and the arms. And we very much love the challenge to go and to engage with other communities because, well, we're all the same people. We all have the same issues, and everyone everywhere absolutely is affected. So that's going to be part of our initiative as well, is to kind of do events in Denver and then go remotely and do events in these other towns. And it is our hope that we can produce a camp, a therapy camp, a Blue Moon camp at these locations as well, throughout the city and throughout the state, and create a larger, I think, bigger family that is a community that is not just going to be a village, but a real Blue Moon community of campers, of families alike. Michelle talked to you about, the single mothers and all these, that's who we are servicing now because their kids are in our program. But for all you fathers out there, all you single fathers and shared responsibility, you don't have to be just the single father. You can be in a divorce and have your kids, but you're doing it alone is what I'm saying. And if you need a partner in crime, if you need assistance in that, if you have questions about things that mothers would only know how to answer, we would love to be that bridge. I love being the bridge and being somewhat of a father figure, a mentor to our kids in our camp, because I know the power of it. I will talk about my father, and how, my lessons were the things that I wasn't going to do. The lack thereof, the fathering, is what I will become in my fatherhood. So that was my learning lesson. And in 2006, 2007, I started Daddy Doula, which was a childbirth education company for new fathers. And it was simply just to educate new fathers and to let them know that you're not alone. I had the same fears. I had the same questions. And here I am, 10 years later, and running a business in mental health field with my wife, and it is a family business, and knowing how much the need for community is, what it really means to have support. And so that's kind of where we are going to do and why we are doing this. And so this podcast, I'm absolutely asking for people to call in, come onto the show. Let's talk about these same things, and align ourselves and gather more support and build a bigger community. But that's what our initiative, that's what our effort is. It's Blue Moon's mission to grow and expand in all of these things. We are in pending status for our nonprofit. We're waiting for our tax exempt so that we can get fundraising. We have a winter gala fundraising event set for November, in late November 23rd, I believe, in Castle Pines. So we'll be releasing this all out on the Facebook, on the Twitter. This is our launching weekend. This is the launch of our podcast. This is the launch of us going public, per se. So please look on, go to our Facebook pages, and we will have this all posted out there. Post on social media platforms, whatever you like. But if you're not reaching out to us, I most likely will be reaching out to you very soon. That's for everybody, and anybody in my Google search, you'll be getting a call real soon. And we have a team of great folks that will be reaching out as well. But if it sounds interesting to you, or if you just have the same message, or you have that same or another option to put on the table, and you just would like some help to get it out there, we would love to be a part of that, be a partner, or get some mentorship, get some advice. We are looking for it just as much, right? We are new to a lot of these things. So it's just our goal to be transparent, to be genuine, and have as little filter as possible, I think, to give our opinions. But it is absolutely as well my effort to not be one-sided, to try to be as empathetic to any side of a discussion or a conversation. But really, it's just to have I think a platform for people to come to. We live in a crazy, crazy world. It's super complex. It's difficult. And every day we are faced with a new headline, a new challenge that's not so new. And it just seems like every step we take forward, it's like going in, kind of a rat race. It's in a circle, and it's like being in a wheel. And I think there are ways out of it. I think we have figured out a very good solution here. I feel like we have a great option, but we're engaged, and we feel like we're helping people, and they are accepting the help, and then them in turn, which is funny, full circle, is they're helping other people and wanting to help us help others. So in closing, Michelle, do you have anything else you'd like to say before we wrap up, and anything I missed?
Yeah, I would. I think that the transparency part of why I'm here and why I wanted to do this is, kind of the twofold. It's, I am, for the first time in a very long time, I've been a very busy therapist for a really long time. I apologize to all those people who've called, for private pay or for other insurances who've been wanting to get in with me. And I'm just so honored that my name and my reputation has made an impact on this community. And it's been hard not being able to accept new clients because shifting to the therapy camp, I gave up a lot of the individual practice because the therapy camp, so many kids and so many families, I just believe that it's a better way. And so right now I am accepting new kids for our new therapy camp. And I want to make sure that you know how to contact me. I think that the best way to contact Eric and I, as of today after this podcast, there's two things I think that you'll see on our Facebook page. You can message me on Facebook. And so, the Blue Moon Counseling Where Families Grow Facebook page is going to be up and live, and we'll put the podcast on there as well as we'll be showing you where we are for everyone and everywhere on that Facebook page. So if you're interested interested and you want to contact me and get your kid in therapy camp or hear more about it. Or I'm also looking for partnerships and the financial funding right now. And a lot of people are asking me, how can we help? All my peers or my friends, all my family, all the colleagues I've worked with, how can I help Blue Moon Counseling? How can I help your mission to keep Blue Moon Therapy Camp growing and thriving? And, I am accepting donations, and we're waiting for this nonprofit, and you're going to see a GoFundMe. And it's so important to say that because I have to be transparent, because at this time, expanding and going non-for-profit, I have to go through a financial transition. I cannot no longer rely on, the financial funding of just insurances for Medicaid of the children and families we've been treating who come from kind of the most challenging situations in child poverty. So I can't do that anymore because we have to move forward and we have to expand and we have to go non-for-profit and we have to be able to be a bridge to these children and these families and go to Montrose. I have to kind of uproot and change, and I need financial support to change. I want these children that I have been treating be able to continue into this treatment. I need the sponsorships for them because at this time, what I've dedicated to the families is to provide pro bono child and family therapy support to all these families for as long as physically possible for me, where pro bono, is free. And like you said, we're putting our money as a couple where our mouth is. We believe in this. We're transitioning, we're changing, we're putting our financial investment as, a couple who, into this transition, into this change, and I need financial support to help me change and transition and expand. So, look for the GoFundMe to help me do pro bono. That'll be in between our non-for-profit, and then our non-for-profit, by the time we do our big gala launch, it's going to be a really amazing party. Like Eric and I said, we love to throw a good party, and we will have invitations, and we'll be going out. If you're interested in being a financial donor, coming to that gala and hearing about us and partying with us a little bit, it's right before Thanksgiving. So November 23rd, it's going to be a beautiful house, and you'll meet some of our child ambassadors from our current therapy camp. We've been talking about that. So you'll meet a couple of the kids, and then they'll go home and we'll have adult time and hang out and celebrate and get to know each other and share more about the mission and raise money to help us transition, right, and raise money to help us transition into accepting more clients and expanding. And I'm just really excited about that, and I'm really excited, and I'm just really grateful for anyone who wants to become a partner. Who, if you believe in this, if you believe in everyone everywhere, if you believe that Blue Moon Therapy Camp should be a bridge, if you're in a school district right now, if you have a position with a school and you want Blue Moon Therapy Camp to come out, we'll come, we'll do an event, we'll talk to your kids. That's what we know how to do. If you're in Montrose and you say, hey, we want Blue Moon Therapy Camp to come out and to do a 2-day event with our kids and our youth who are struggling, who've been through a loss, we will be there. I just ready for calls, ready for you to come, ready for some partnerships. I don't know what's out there. I don't know what the future holds, but I know that we're dedicated to the mission, and it's a solution. And I can't wait to share more about how the solution works and how it's working. And I'm really excited. We're going to have a big launch. If any of those kids out there, if you have kids, if kids are in middle school, if they're in elementary school, if they've been through something challenging, or if you're worried about how they're feeling, depression, suicide, if no matter what, it's really hard to find a mental health counselor. I know, because I haven't been accepting any clients for 2 years. I checked my voicemail the other day, and there's so many clients who are still needing help. I haven't been able to. So I'm really excited to open my doors up again and get back out there. And so take advantage of this opportunity. We're going to have a big launch of a event. I think we're going to do it free. I think that's on the table, is we're going to have this trial therapy camp day for all of these kids who are interested. Parents will be meeting with one section, so you'll learn about it, and the kids will be doing camp, because really the cool thing about therapy camp is the kids love it and they want to come. And that's the huge difference. If you're going to try to get your kid to come see me individually, yes, I can work with them, and yes, I can do that. But really, therapy camp is a better way, because once they see us and meet us and experience us,
and it starts out fun.
Oh,
right?
Yeah. When we tie in that movement, when we tie in that activity, when we tie in the show and in the memory and the event, these children are hooked. And our children are part of the program. Kaiden and Laven have been, they're part of therapy camp. We've integrated them. They, some of our other counselors have integrated their kids. It's not all kids who just have these major problems. It's for all kids that need a village, all kids that you don't want them to get mental illness, all kids where you're like, hey, honey, you went through something hard a couple years ago, and the kid's like, no, I'm fine. Okay, you don't want an individual therapist. Let's try this. Let's go to this therapy camp and see if we can find you a place in this world so that they can continue to grow and to be the healthiest version. And let's prevent some of this more serious stuff that happens when it goes untreated, it goes unnoticed.
Yes. So, there's the call. There's our call for help, for partnership. We are going to need volunteers. We would love to meet new therapists. If your city, your neighborhood, your town, like Michelle said, if you're abnormally suffering, if there is just this this dark cloud that you guys are just going through, and you are a provider in that city, we would love to show you this method. We would love to support you. We would love to take you in, and even allowing you to be in with us as a partner in your community and serve a camp. Those are all the things that we are asking for right now. And we're going to need an army. We are going to need a nation. We are going to need a community. So
traveling circus will come to you.
The traveling circus is coming.
Yeah.
You'll see us for sure. And then I guess just my last thank you is, I don't know if you like that, but Chris Faust with Sphere here for hosting the podcast and just giving us an opportunity. He shared a lot with me as I did with him, and this is exactly, I think, a product of exactly what we are asking and what we are putting out there to the public. And it's I hadn't known Chris. I have never done a podcast before, and after a meeting that went from 1 hour to 3.5 hours, here I am, and it feels awesome. So Chris, thank you for supporting us, for Michelle and for Blue Moon, and I'm really excited to see what happens from here. But thanks for tuning in, and I will see you next time on the next podcast.